Hello and welcome. I am Lopamudra Moitro and you are listening to my weekly podcast, What's in a Story, where I read stories from my books along with a small introduction about each. These stories are from my work as an anthropologist from across India and South Asia, and the introductions with each story helps to explain different related information about, say, maybe aspects like history, languages and literature, music, trade and economy, festivals, or facts about archaeology, and many other things which are all important to understand or get a meaning or a context of a story. In this second season, we will listen specially to narratives of and about water bodies from Asia, and this will include stories from the smallest of water bodies like wells or small ponds to lakes, rivers, or the sea and the ocean. Let's listen to today's episode in season 2 of What's in a Story. The story. This is a story about Sri Lanka, the Colombo port, and the Indian Ocean. And the story is based on a proverb, a very popular proverb from Sri Lanka, which is still quite in use, even at present. Now, proverbs are often quite important sources. It's like source of information which often helps to preserve very important aspects of absolutely local or regional history. Thus, these proverbs, which generally have existed as oral traditions for a long period of time, forming a part of intangible cultural heritage, often thus acts as storehouses of information for various aspects of regional history, which often goes unnoticed from the pages of mainstream history books. But it is nevertheless an important task is also to validate, corroborate the information provided or the subtext within the proverb. Today's story speaks about one such proverb, an important one, which has often found mention through different contemporary colonial historians from Sri Lanka, both Portuguese as well as English colonial historians from the land. And the proverb goes as Parangiya Kotte giya, or how the Portuguese went to Kotte. This proverb basically denotes a longer method to accomplish a task or to reach a destination in comparison to any easier or an alternative method which can get the work done faster. Interestingly enough, this proverb explains an important part of history which goes back to the days of the beginning of the Portuguese colonial rule in Sri Lanka in the beginning of 16th century. And like I mentioned, this has found a mention in colonial historians, the books of colonial historians, Portuguese as well as English, and still survives in common parlance, common general sentences even at present. Now, there are even at present quite simple English versions for children, young readers, illustrated and picture books available that explains this concept of as the Parangi went to Kotte or Parangiya Kotte giya, where Parangi comes from the word Firangi and loosely in this context speaks about the Portuguese, the first Europeans who also were behind setting up their colony in the country during the 16th century. Now, the proverb follows a very popular lore which explains the very first visit of the Portuguese merchant and sailors who wanted to visit the king of the kingdom of Kotte. Upon their arrival, and when they asked the locals that they wanted to meet the king and visit his palace, the locals were very skeptical. Thus, instead of showing them a direct way, they took the Portuguese in a roundabout manner to reach the palace. So, normally it would have taken a few hours, but this circuitous road practically took several days. So, even at present, this is exactly how it is explained as the proverb is used to denote any incident or a task which is done in a much more complicated way rather than the simple way in which it can be quickly accomplished. Now, whether something like this really happened or not, that very specific aspect is very difficult to determine, but it is definite that a meeting did takes place, and this has been mentioned by various contemporary historians. In reality, historical documents state the first meeting with the king took place, followed by a second meeting, and the meetings generally centered around trade arrangements and future possibilities of trade and commerce. And one of the significant mention in recent times about this is from the writing of historian Stuart Schwartz in 1994. He writes that in the year 1506, Dom Lourenco de Almeida, son of the then Portuguese Viceroy, Dom Francisco de Almeida, I'm quoting here now, was patrolling the area of the Maldives island to the south of Sri Lanka when his ships were driven by storms to the coast of Sri Lanka and made their way to Colombo. Colombo was the port nearest to Kotte, the capital city of the major kingdom of Sri Lanka. Unquote. Now, Schwartz made his observations about this important discovery on the basis of old Portuguese accounts of Portuguese historians like Fernao de Queyroz, who mentioned that from the port of Cochin in southern India, in the month of November 1505, 9 Arab vessels left for the Maldives, which was at a distance of 61 leagues, but was driven by a storm to the southern Sri Lankan port of Galle, from where they went to the port of Colombo. And when the locals saw them, there was much quote-unquote astonishment. Historian Paulus Edward Pieris, in his Ceylon and the Portuguese 1505 to 1658 book, which was published in 1920, also speaks about the incident, specifically the events preceding the incident. He mentions on the 15th of November, a fleet of Portuguese sailors and merchants led by Dom Lourenco landed at the Colombo fort. On their arrival, Dom Lourenco de Almeida set up the usual padrao at Colombo, and he sent a message to the king that he was a merchant and desired to meet him. The king, in return, put a message that he should be duly sending a representative to discuss the matters with him, along with a Sinhalese escort. So, the officer named Fernao de Queyroz set out to meet the king. Now, the sacred book from Sri Lanka, the Rajavaliya, also mentions the fleet who went to meet the king as, and I'm quoting here, There is in our harbour of Colombo a race of people fair of skin and comely withal. They don jackets of iron and hats of iron. They rest not a minute in one place. They walk here and there. They eat chunks of stone and drink blood. They give 2 or 3 pieces of gold and silver for one fish or one lime. They report their cannon is louder than thunder when it bursts upon the rock Yugandhara. Their cannon balls fly many a gawa and shatter fortresses of granite. According to the present proverb, Kotte was led through a circuitous route through the palace to the palace. However, the very fact that Kotte's visit went really well is proven by the fact that immediately after the first meeting, the king called for a second meeting to discuss further possibilities of trade. However, what transpired in the decades to come is very unfortunate, because that resulted in the beginning of the Portuguese colonial period in the country, which continued for a century till the Battle of Mannar in February 1658 with the Dutch and with the subsequent capture of Jaffna. This marked the end of the Portuguese rule in Ceylon. Unfortunately, it also marked the beginning of the Dutch colonial period in Sri Lanka till the Dutch were defeated by the British in 1796, when the Dutch strongholds were surrendered to the British, including Trincomalee, and this happened between July 21st, 1795 to February 15th, 1796. Unfortunately, this also resulted in the third colonial period of the country under the British Crown, which finally ended on the 4th of February 1948, the Independence Day of Sri Lanka. Coming back to the proverb once again, it is important to note here how the simple proverb, something like this, a close study and analysis and observation practically can lead to read much associated information, understand certain context, and in this respect also the beginning of the systematic exploitation of various resources of the land in centuries to come. But maybe that is another story and maybe for another episode. For the time being, let's meet the Portuguese as they venture on their path to meet the king of Kotte, and whether there is any truth behind the story or not exactly as is mentioned. However, that has not yet been proved, but definitely it does prove that the meeting did take place, and definitely there was a degree of skepticism. Nevertheless, the meeting was successful and it followed several other following meetings, resulting in trade contracts and unfortunately also the colonial period that followed. In the present version, please note that what is mentioned in the sacred book Rajavaliya, the story that I will be reading, also mentions words and texts from the same Rajavaliya. This also shows the influence of Rajavaliya on the proverb. I will be reading this text, How the Portuguese Went to Kotte, from my research paper titled the same, published in 2019 in Pratna Darpan, edited by Shubha Mojumdar and Pompa Bishwas, on behalf of the Paschim Bongo Ancholik Itihash o Lok Sanskriti Chorcha Kendra. And the text that I will be reading is part of the book by J.B. Disanayak, a Sumitra book publication from Sri Lanka. Follows the story, How the Portuguese Went to Kotte. The story Parangiya Kotte or How the Portuguese Went to Kotte. It was a windy day in Colombo. The coconut trees on the beach were twisting in the wind. The waves of the sea were tougher than usual. There were signs of a storm. Men and women, boys and girls watched the sea in surprise. What on earth is going to happen? But it was not only a storm. There was a whole fleet of ships drifting towards the harbour in Colombo. Men watched with care. What are these ships? Whose ships are these? All the ships finally came to the Colombo port. One or two got off their ships and came ashore. Who on earth are these, with helmets on their heads and dressed in unusual ways? Thought the Sinhalese. They began to eat something and began to drink something. What they ate looked like stones. What they drank looked like blood. Red as red could be. They had never seen a set of people like them before. The Sinhalese approached the strangers little by little. The strangers also came towards the city little by little. They were jabbering, and the Sinhalese did not understand a word of what they said. However, the Sinhalese began to gesture by their heads, eyes, hands, elbows, and shoulders. The strangers said, "If your country has a ruler, we would like to meet him." The people said, "Our ruler is a king and he lives in his palace in Kotte." "Well," said the same strangers, "we would be very happy to meet him." The Sinhalese, however, were not happy to take these unknown men to their king. "How do we know what they'll do to our king?" they thought. Since the strangers were very keen on meeting the king, the Sinhalese agreed at last to take them to the palace. Even though the palace was not very far from Colombo, they did not want the strangers to know that. They warned the strangers, "You have to walk a long way and the trek is really rough." But strangely, the strangers agreed to take the risk. Now, a group of Sinhalese and a group of strangers started off on their way to the palace of the king in Kotte. At first, they walked through bushes. There were leeches sucking their blood. There were red ants biting them. There they got entangled in bushes. Here they slipped down the rocks. The strangers, however, tolerated all these agonies because they wanted to see the king. Then they began to walk through slopes. There they began to climb a rock. Here they began to slip down a precipice. However, they kept walking. There they had to walk on rocks that burned their feet like fire. Here they came out of ditches of mud. The strangers bore all these agonies because they wanted to see the king. After walking like that for many days, all the people at least reached the grand palace at Kotte. But the strangers were surprised to hear the sirens of their ships so close by, parked at the harbour. Then they realized that the Sinhalese had tricked them, that they had been taken for a ride. They realized that the Sinhalese had taken them to the palace on a long circuitous route to give them the impression that the king lived far away and to dissuade them from going to meet him. Sometime later, the Sinhalese came to know who these strangers were. They had come from Europe, they had come from Portugal, and the Sinhalese called them Parangi. Ever since then, when people are taken on a longer route to a place that can be reached within a short distance, they began to say, "It's like how the Portuguese went to Kotte."